Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is David Bose. I'm the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center. And we thank you for joining us every week during the legislative session. We bring forward our research team, members of our research team, and special guests to give you the latest of what's happening in Olympia. Also, at washingtonpolicy.org, our website, you see the same thing, except daily, even hourly sometimes. Each of our center directors is writing and blogging and updating about what's happening in Olympia, what's happening with state policy proposals, how much they're going to cost you, what their possible impacts will be, and what that will make for the future of Washington State. We also have been releasing the report card for Washington's future. We have another update on that in the agriculture sector coming up later this week. And if you have missed that so far, you're going to want to update yourself on that as well. So be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter if you haven't already, so that you get the latest on what's happening with Washington Policy Center and with Washington State, because that's what it comes down to. It's information you don't get anywhere else. Today we've got a big program. We've got two of our center directors. Mark Harmsworth will be joining us a bit later on. We'll be talking about some of the high-tech taxes and what's happening with the property tax bill, among other things. That's what I like to call the triple tax. But first, we are going to be joined by Elizabeth New. She is our healthcare and worker rights center director. She's got two centers, two areas of expertise to go for. And I want to start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, again, thanks so much, obviously, for taking the time. I know you guys are really busy, and you've broken records for WPC in terms of the number of times legislators have asked you to testify this year is more than anybody else this year. So you're really stretched for time. Let's start with the thing that's really kind of grabbed the attention of so many people around the state, which is the parents' rights bill or I should say the modification, clarification, or gutting of the parents' rights bill. We had an initiative, hundreds of thousands of people signed it. The legislature signed off on it, and it seems like they did so in order to gut it the following year, and this is that following year. Where are we on that bill, and what's your take on where it's going?
Well, it's super confusing, which is exactly how I think lawmakers who want this legislation would like things. Initiative 2081 created a list of parent rights. The part of that I'm concerned with, that the legislation moving the legislature would dismantle, are things like notification of ongoings about medical situations. So medical records that the school knows about, they don't have to share with parents. Now, I don't think that math teachers and counselors even necessarily are sitting around talking to kids about their possible reproductive choices or gender hopes and dreams. I don't think that's really what this is about. It's about health centers and schools having access to kids, and the kids can go there without notifying or gathering parent consent. And what 2081 would do is say, hey, if the schools know about it, we get to know about it. So I think that's reasonable. 2081 did not change state law, which is already horrible in that it allows, there's a mature minors doctrine that allows kids 13 and older to make some important medical decisions for themselves without parent knowledge or consent, usually surrounding reproductive issues, STDs, gender situations, gender identity. So that already exists. 2081 did not take that away. That law is still in force. If a 13-year-old wants to walk out of school to a clinic and do those things, he or she can do those things. But this bill said if schools know about these medical situations that kids are involving themselves in, they had to notify parents. So that's kind of the belly of this, and a lot of lawmakers will say that's misrepresentation. Schools are not giving medical information to kids. They are not making referrals, but we know that it is happening, that sometimes when kids go to educators instead of their parents, for good reasons or bad, about their need for what they feel is a need for a medical issue, that schools are not having to notify parents and let them be involved in these life-changing decisions. So
But
that's
isn't it also true, though, that the school officials and teachers and others can give advice? There's no problem with them giving advice or counsel or aiding in these kinds of decisions, but then there's no obligation to make sure parents know. And that's where I, as a parent, would take I'd have big problems with, because there's lifelong decisions that are being made, and as much time and as much trust as parents put, toward the school system and towards parents, and how kids are going to feel a natural bonding with anybody they spend that much time with and is teaching them and other things. There's a certain trust factor that you remember who the parent is and who's got the long-term, lifelong, even when they're when they're older, they're going to be coming home and dealing with all the different challenges. Whereas when kids leave school, the teacher does not have that same kind of long-term relationship and commitment and obligation. So there's traditionally been a respect for that parental role, and this looks like this is dismissive of that to me.
exactly, parents are the primary caregivers of kids. They usually know and love their children the most. And we know that parental guidance helps kids through lifelong decision making, and that academic achievement is better if you have parents involved. So it's bizarre to me that we're trying to remove parental guidance on such important matters where we know parental guidance helps kids. And there's two bills in the legislature right now dealing with Initiative 2081 that lawmakers passed last session, and they knew they were going to come back to it. They knew they were passing it, and it was going to have to be discussed later. That's what they say, the proponents of these bills. So I'm not putting any intentions on them. I just heard in a hearing, we knew we'd have to come back to this. So here we are. We've come back to this bill or this initiative. We look like we were in support of because we knew it would have to be massaged. So one of the bills really got a lot of fire among people and viewers. It was House Bill 1296. Not only would it create a new set and publicized set of student rights and privacy rights, it took away the parent rights in 2081 to things like notification that your child is leaving campus, if the school knows, things like if your child is seeking these life-changing decisions without your knowledge, but the school knew. So that was one of them. And there's a big twist here. Last week, they took the parents' rights part out of House Bill 1296. So I'm worried that people who were following 1296 and hoping that lawmakers would do right by families will think that this has been neutered. This problem has been neutered because they took out the parents' rights. Instead, they bring a lot of penalties for educators who don't honor student rights and a student list of rights, etc. But the key here is Senate Bill 5181 is the parents' rights dismantling part now. So while House Bill 1296 goes after the student angle, it looks like Senate Bill 5181 goes after taking away the parents' rights to notification that were in 2081. So I'm mostly watching that bill. I'm watching that bill the closest and hoping to offer testimony when it comes up. And basically the takeaway here is that if 5181 passes, as Representative Marshall put it well in debate on Friday in the House Education Committee, we will have active legislation that helps provide cover for schools to hide things from parents. Again, I don't think most educators have any interest in being involved in any of this, but that doesn't mean that it is not possible at times for educators to be the confidants of students who can make these lifelong medical decisions on their own because of state law and further keep parents away from the information.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, it's not difficult to find stories of educators that have crossed the line and several different lines. So, they're human like anybody else. There's problems there, and having parents have the right is part of that wonderful system of check and balances that when you give that much trust to someone, just like a daycare center or anything else, there's a certain amount of trust that parents instill, and they expect, they expect things in return, and you expect to be informed. I think that's I think there's a lot going on there. I think it actually spills into the budget debate, which we'll talk about with Mark later too, because I know a part of these proposals is hey, let's pass a sales tax cut now, but we won't actually cut it for 2 years. And it reminded me of this bill where you have this thing where you pass it to make people feel better because there's too many hundreds of thousands of people upset about it. And then you're also saying, well, but we'll fix it before it's actually enforced anywhere. And by fix, it means to gut. So you just never know what's going to happen with the legislature. What about the striking workers issue, where there was a movement and a proposal for Washington to start paying unemployment benefits to workers who go on strike? Of course, the first company that comes to mind is the big Boeing strikes. And to me, this would be the state taking a position in a strike by subsidizing striking workers with the unemployment that other people have paid.
Yeah, 5041, and I want to get back to something on the parents' rights situation after this. But the 5041 is the bill that would give unemployment insurance benefits to striking workers. Now, the unemployment insurance fund is funded by employers. So what you're saying is employers who have workers striking against them have to pay them to strike against them. And they have to be on the hook later when the Employment Security Department assesses how many people took these benefits or went on strike. That's going to come back on those employers who have to replenish the fund with money that they've already paid to pay these striking workers. So it's bizarre to me that you could ever expect that. And the one who there's a legitimate argument to be made that sometimes low-income workers, if you can call them low-income workers, entry wage workers working at Starbucks, etc., have a hardship if they go on strike at the urging of a union and need money to live or have to find another job and can't go through with the strike activity. Unions should be paying for that. They collect union dollars every year from every member. That is who should be financing a strike fund. And in some cases they do. They're usually small. You bring up Boeing, they were paying a small strike fund. If those Boeing machinists had been eligible for unemployment insurance benefits, they would have gotten something like 1,000 something a week to go on strike, which was much higher than the strike pay that was going to those employees. And I think I did the numbers, and using a number of 30,000 workers on strike, getting the max payment under this year's version of the strike pay, we would have paid $367 million about from that strike fund to those Boeing machinists. Another interesting thing about this bill is that if you receive strike pay, public employees are included in the eligibility for strike pay, and it's against the law, it's prohibited, but teachers do it all the time. So if they get their pay, as they always do, for a 180-day contract, but they also collected strike pay for the weeks that they struck. If they strike, usually they're less than 2 weeks, they would not be eligible. But if this law exists, those could go on much longer than they do now. In any case, if they get that pay, that doesn't make them ineligible from their regular pay. So they could be collecting unemployment insurance benefits, they could be collecting their usual pay for their teacher contract, and you could be double paying teachers for not having school for kids and putting taxpayers on hold for services they expect. So that's a really interesting element to me, and I'm surprised the public employee angle hasn't been shoved out. This will cost taxpayers more, in my opinion. It could encourage more strikes, private and public. So I'm concerned about this bill hurting more workers then it would help. You know, lawmakers in trying to help some union member workers, which is a minority, they're going to be hurting workers in general with a threatened UI fund, with higher cost for services. They're hurting businesses who offer jobs that we should want to be grateful for and move to other jobs if we don't feel we're being fairly compensated. So that bill is on the move. Right now, a striking worker could get 12 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits. Last year, that number was 4 weeks. It started this year at 26 weeks, the full allotment for unemployment insurance benefits, and it's down to 12. So I don't know about the strategy they're in, but that's where we're at. And I think there's a hearing on Friday that should either move it on to don't quote me, let me look here. There's a public hearing on Friday in the House of, in the Appropriations Committee at 1:30.
Yeah, it's really stunning to me that the whole obligation to stay neutral between those parties isn't present either, because once the state gets involved in mandating a payment, you mentioned it could, I just don't see how it would not encourage strikes, or at least make things more likely in that direction, just because the hardship is less. I mean, people respond with, whether it's the corporate owners or the workers, people respond to incentives, and that's a big incentive in there.
Yeah, and unions can pay for that. If you really believe striking workers should be paid to strike and not work, most of us believe you should get paid to work and not work. But if you believe they should be paid not to work and they need that pay to get through a strike, unions can do that. They collect hundreds of dollars from each member every single year. That is what union dues should be for, protecting workers.
Yeah, I can see why it would be a hardship. And one of the things you'd have to do is plan ahead. If you see this coming, then you're going to want to plan several months in advance, and not just with the union funds, but also with your own funds. If you have an open communication with the workers you're representing, you would be saying, look, we need to save up for this, because if this doesn't change, we may have to do this. Go on strike, and make sure that you have the ability to make your positions, powerful. You mentioned that you wanted to address one more thing on the parents' rights issue before we move to the Medicaid issue.
I do. I wanted to say that even when Initiative 2081 was adopted by the legislature, which kept it off the ballot, which made it look like they were in favor of it, and people could be assured that they'd be getting notification of things and they could see controversial materials and surveys and all of that. Even when that was happening and there wasn't these legislative challenges to undercut it, I thought, oh no, I hope parents don't feel like they're safe from people with different beliefs becoming some of the primary influences.
Yeah, influencers.
Their
Yeah.
child's life. I have kids in school. I've seen materials that come home with them that were not in the curriculum I viewed for sexual and health education. And when I went to the district and said, hey, I didn't see this in there, please show me where it is, because I didn't expect this to come home. They told me, well, teachers have leeway. They can go ahead and show what they would like. And there's tons of legislation and lines in statutes that talk about how teachers can decide what's appropriate, age appropriate. The reality is we have different opinions and values about what kids should be learning, what they should be thinking about what they're learning, what we want them to take away from what they're learning. So this is really important that, parents stay involved in the things that their kids are being taught, what they're coming home with. And, especially if your school has a health center on site, there's 30 something-ish, I think, don't quote me, health centers, mostly in the King County area and bigger school districts. You really have to be aware that your children could be accessing the services at that healthcare center without your knowledge and definitely without your consent. And like I said, I think most educators want to be parents' partners. And that's the saddest thing about these pieces of legislation that undermine the initiative that lawmakers look like they were for, is they have created a distrust between parents and educators, and that's a mess. You know, more people will probably leave the schools if these bills pass.
Since the budget has been one of the bigger issues around, and the legislative majority keep talking about, how we're in this big deficit, we've got to be able to fill it. You've brought up the subject of Medicaid and the need for reform there and the need for some changes in order to save some significant money. Why don't you describe what's going on with Medicaid and what the responses have been?
I thought this would be an easy thing for everyone to support. The state auditor's office, run by a Democratic state auditor, issues a report that says we're spending about $8.6 million a year on concurrent Medicaid payments. Concurrent payments are if you have a person who lives in Washington who's on Medicaid, but they move to another state and they're then on Medicaid in that state, or vice versa. The estates are paying twice for a benefit the client is only going to use in one place. So these concurrent payments offer nothing to the Medicaid client. They're offering a double dipping of the payment that's on taxpayers' backs for these clients. So I thought this would be an easy get rid of, waste issue, and it has not passed. The opposition I saw to this bill, it was 52-58. The bill is dead. Senator Chris Gildon brought it forward, and he's a pretty good guru this year on all things budget, but that was one of the things, and I thought it'd be easy. I think he thought it would be a sensible thing. Obviously, he proposed the legislation, and the opposition I heard in committee around this bill was, one, the audit was done during a COVID year, during which redeterminations were not being required. So it was very possible that the double up of payments was higher than it would be in a different year. So that's legit, but even if it's lower, any money saved is good. I don't get the argument, well, it won't save as much as we think, maybe, so let's not do it. These processes, I hope, state agencies, HCA and DSHS, will go after on their own without legislation. This is just horrible waste, and the taxpayer is paying the bill.
That is really odd, especially, as you put it, if you can save a little money easily, then you would want to save a little money easily. I mean, I don't see the downside on this one.
And $8.6 million is only small in comparison to a huge budget overspending budget that we have, and 8.6 every year. Think about it. That's so much money.
Yeah.
In the eyes of people, but I think we all get confused by the amounts and how big is big, and to an average watcher, $8.6 million a year is a lot. I want to save it.
I'm sure Todd could figure out some salmon recovery issues that he could solve with $8.6 million a year. I'm sure they'd be thrilled by it. As always, thanks, Elizabeth. I know you've been very busy, so thanks for taking some time out of your schedule for Washington Policy on the Go.
You bet. Thanks, Dave.
All right, see you.